Okay, welcome to Kesher this evening. We are continuing our studies of Sages of the Ages, a five-part series in which we are exploring the lives and legacies of five outstanding Torah personalities, mostly from the 16th century. And tonight we are going to consider one of the most influential Torah personalities for reasons that I will explain shortly. And that is the Ari, known as Arizal, and it says here at the top of the page, Rabbi Luria Ashkenazi. That was his full name or his formal name, but he is remembered as Ari, and it seems he was known by that nickname even possibly in his lifetime, certainly shortly after his lifetime. Of course, you know, Ari means lion, and based on that, his disciples, his circle of students and followers, were known as the Gurei Ha'ari, the lion cubs. And it's an interesting designation. Where does it come from, the name Ari, the acronym Ari? It's unusual. Most rabbis, their acronym starts with a Resh, like Rambam, Ramban, Rashi, if I can use that example. Or like with a Hey, like, or like with a Mem, Maharshal or Maharam, which is Moreno Harav. Ari, as far as I'm aware, is unique that his nickname, his designation, starts with an Aleph, and it stands for Eloki, the godly, the divine. Eloki Rabbeinu Yitzchak, the divine Rabbi Yitzchak. And although there were many great Kabbalists before him and after him, but he is possibly the greatest Kabbalist of all, and perhaps this is why he alone, as to my knowledge, has acquired that designation of the godly one, Ari. So Ari is Eloki Rabbeinu Yitzchak. I have a theory that he was possibly known as Hariel, which you'd find also, or Ariel, they call him Ariel as well. I think, which is the lion of God, but I think that Ariel is a corruption of Hariel, and they called him Harav Yitzchak Ashkenazi Luria. He was known as Ashkenazi, or his father was known as Ashkenazi as like a nickname because he came from Ashkenaz. Luria evidently was the family surname. So I think that possibly Ari came from Hariel, became Ariel, became Ari. But anyway, that's just a matter of speculation. Today he is known as Ari HaKadosh, the holy Ari, or Arizal, and that's the last of them is the way by which he's most frequently known. I have a little theory about Arizal. Of course, Zal means Zichrono Livracha. I have a little theory. I mean, one could say, and we do say, Zichrono Livracha about any great person, even, let's say, a regular person, a regular rabbi, you might say Zichrono Livracha after he passes away. But again, Arizal is the only one for whom the Zal is part of his name. It's almost become associated with his name. I have a little theory about that as well. It's complete speculation on my part. We might as well mention right now that he died very young. You may or may not know that he died at the age of 38, which is a young age. Even in his time it was young, certainly for a great and distinguished rabbi. Uncommon that he should die, that such a rabbi would die at such an age, not because rabbis don't die prematurely, but a person normally does not acquire great eminence by the age of 38. And it's extraordinary that he did acquire that great eminence, and perhaps by the time his fame spread, as it did quite quickly throughout the world, but even so, by the time it spread, he may have already passed away. In other words, by the time people heard about him, there was a great rabbi who lived in Tzfat. You know, he died 6 months ago. So maybe he was called Zal because, as we shall see, he definitely was not well known until he came to Tzfat. And he died not long after his arrival in Tzfat, which is a remarkable phenomenon because Ari is associated with Tzfat even to this day. Anyone who visits Tzfat, and certainly those who are promoting tourism to Tzfat, draw much attention to the fact that this is the city of Ari. And in fact, you see the illustration, the photograph is the kever of the Ari. And I don't know whether it's still the case, but Yosef had on his WhatsApp picture at one time a photograph of himself at the kever of the Ari. It's one of the most visited shrines in terms of burial sites in the Jewish world, I would say, anywhere. So he's associated with Tzfat, and yet he only lived in Tzfat for about 2.5 years. Okay, let's not get ahead of our story though. So if you look at item number 1, Roman or double I, yeah, the Holy Lion. Ari, as we said, means lion, and it's interesting that Luria, the Ari, the great Kabbalist, is known as the lion, and the Rambam, the great rationalist, his nickname is the Nesher, HaNesher HaGadol. It's interesting that the Kabbalist is known as the lion and the rationalist is known as the eagle. Both of these nicknames come from the vision of Yechezkel, who beheld a chariot. One of the most important and profound passages in all of the Hebrew scriptures and all of the Tanakh is Yechezkel's vision of Maaseh Merkava, so-called Maaseh Merkava, and these two figures feature in that vision. When we speak of the Ari, as we're going to do tonight, fact and legend are inextricably intertwined. It's difficult sometimes to separate them one from the other. In the case of the Ari, and that's partly again because he sadly died at such a young age, his opportunity to leave, let's say, a literary record or maybe eyewitness accounts of him and what he did and where he lived are quite limited, maybe, as I said, because he died at such a young age. It may also be consistent with his legacy, which of course was to cultivate the esoteric, the hidden part of the Torah. And in a way, his life also is hidden and is shrouded in legend and sometimes mystery. His impact on the Jewish world is profound, was already, even shortly after his passing, already his impact was widespread, but especially in the Sephardic world, and he's normally regarded as a Sephardi personality. When you visit Tzfat, there are two synagogues of the Ari. There's the Ari Ashkenazi, Ari Sephardi. He didn't daven in either of them because most of the synagogues in town were destroyed in the earthquake, I think we mentioned, in 1837. So they were built afterwards, but in his honor, so to speak. But it's interesting that he's known as Ashkenazi. His father was Ashkenazi, and his mother, it seems, was Sephardi. Where does the name Luria come from? Difficult to know. Some have suggested, I've got it here in the outline as well, Luria from Alsace-Lorraine. Maybe Luria derives from there, in which case it would be the heartland of the old Ashkenazic settlement in the Rhineland. But his mother was Sephardi, and he was born in Yerushalayim, and there's a legend surrounding his birth. What is fascinating, I hope everyone here has been to Yerushalayim, some people live in Yerushalayim, laser. When you visit the old city, the Jewish quarter, one of the main streets is called Rehov Or HaChaim. It's not like a main street like Oxford Circus, don't misunderstand, but it is an important street in the old city of Yerushalayim. On Rehov Or HaChaim, there is a museum of the Yiddish. That building, which is today a small museum, is the place where the Ari was born. In 1534, he was born in that building, and they say that his father was learning late one night, and he was visited by Eliyahu Hanavi. And Eliyahu Hanavi told him that he was destined to father a child who will begin to save the world from the klipos, from the husks of impurity. And many will be rescued through the teachings and through the influence and through the legacy of his son. Said Eliyahu Hanavi, when he's born, I'm going to be the Sandek. Don't let the Mohel get to his task until I arrive. And I don't know whether Eliyahu Hanavi had a few other brisin to get to that morning, but according to the legend, all the guests were assembled and the Mohel was there. He had his equipment at the ready, and the father said, no, not all the guests have arrived. And then finally, Eliyahu Hanavi arrived, but only the father could see him. And the father, according to this tradition, was the Sandek. It's not the norm actually, but in any case, Eliyahu Hanavi sat on the lap of the father and, so to speak, served as the Sandek according to this tradition. In any case, we find that Eliyahu Hanavi, Gilu Eliyahu, was part of the life of the Ari as he grew to maturity. And interestingly, they say that the Or HaChaim, who also lived in that same building 200 years later, also had Gilu Eliyahu. Rabbi Chaim ibn Attar and his Beit Midrash was in that building. So if you've never been to the museum of the old Yeshuv, I hope I've given you an additional reason to pay them a visit. Very worthwhile. The museum is not going to compete with the Israel Museum anytime soon, but still, it's quite. How has been there, by the way? Has anyone been to the museum of the old Yeshuv? Yeah, it's a humble little museum, but I found it fascinating.
It shows the life in the 19th century.
That's right, under the Turks. That's right. Yeah, it's very worthwhile to go. But in any case, that is the significance of that particular address on Rehov Or HaChaim in the old city. His father died soon after, and his mother moved apparently back to Egypt. I say apparently because her brother lived in Egypt, and although we don't have independent evidence, it seems likely that she came from Egypt originally. She was sadly widowed, so she went back to Egypt, and her brother, a man called Mordechai Francis, raised the Ari, and subsequently became his father-in-law as well, because he married his cousin. Ari was 15 years old at that time. He was already, as a young child, perhaps unsurprisingly, showed great brilliance, great intellectual capacity, and therefore his uncle sent him to learn with the greatest rabbi of Cairo at the time, the greatest rabbi in Egypt, whose name was Reb David Ibn Abu Zimra, who you may not have heard of, but he wrote a very important commentary on the Mishnah Torah. He's known as Radvaz. Also many tshuvas, thousands of responsa. The writings of the Radvaz are very widely studied, and his responsa are quoted in the halachic literature all the time. He's among the most influential Torah personalities of his time. He subsequently studied under an older colleague who was also a Talmud of the Radvaz, and that's a man called Rabbi Tzal Ashkenazi. Again, you may not have heard of him. But he wrote a Shita Mekubetzes on Bav Metzia of the Yeshiva Shemesechtas. Anyone who's been to Yeshiva at an advanced level will definitely have studied Shita Mekubetzes. And I can say that of these two, but both of these two, I have personally spent many hours studying their writings and their commentaries, and that's true for anyone with a background in advanced Torah scholarship. Now, my point here is that he was raised from an early age to acquire great proficiency in what we call nigla. Nigla means revealed Torah. What you see on the shelves here, not what you see here, there's all Mistar. But generally when you walk into a yeshiva, at least yeshivas that I've been to, you see mostly Sfarim on the shelves which are in the area of Nigla, the revealed teachings of the Torah, in terms of halacha, Talmudic scholarship, and rendering halachic decisions in matters of civil law, religious law, etc. And it seems that he achieved great eminence in that regard. According to the Chidah, he writes in his Shem HaGedolim that the Ari actually authored or collaborated with his Rebbe, Rabbi Tzal Ashkenazi, in a Shita Mekubetzes on Masechta Zvachim. And if anyone has not learned the Shita Mekubetzes on Masechta Zvachim, you're to be forgiven, because unfortunately the manuscript was destroyed in Izmir in 1735. It was burned. It was the only manuscript that existed, as far as we know anyway, in 1735. It was never published, so unfortunately it has been lost to posterity. Masechta Zvachim is a very difficult Masechta. I learned that Masechta a few years ago with my Chavrusa, and we did not have access to the Shita Mekubetzes of the Ari. It would have been something very remarkable, I'm sure. So my point is that he acquired great proficiency and eminence even in matters of Talmud study and the sort of mainstream disciplines which occupy the brilliant minds of Torah scholarship throughout the ages. Just like to mention a little bit more on this subject. my good friend Miguel showed me that in the Avkat Rochel, which is a collection of responsa of the Beis Yosef, there is a response, a question and response to the Ari. The Ari asked the Beis Yosef a certain halachic question, and he replied, and the question itself is expressed, it's not just a one-line question. The question itself takes up a few paragraphs, maybe more, and the answer as well. So the question is almost as long as the answer, because the questioner was very learned, and he expressed a number of different possibilities, and it was a matter relating to business affairs. This is subject to some controversy, because some people don't like the idea that the Ari, who was so very great, and he was a master of halacha as well, as we said, why should he have to ask the Beis Yosef a halachic question? If he's so great, he can answer it himself. So actually the Ben Ish Chai claims that it's inauthentic, and it was never really addressed to him as well, altogether, and that whoever published it wanted to raise the prestige of this tshuva collection, and said, yeah, there's even a tshuva to the Ari here. And actually, some of the early manuscripts don't have the name of the Ari at all there. However, yesh ladun b'zeh, because the Chida claims that he did see it, I don't know whether a manuscript or something, the original manuscript, and it is addressed to the Ari. And in terms of explaining why he needed to ask this question, so firstly, you should know that when one looks in tshuvas, like Ibris Moshe, we have here other tshuvas, it's not rare to find questions that are addressed by great rabbis to the particular respondent. It's not rare that you find even Shlomo Zalman Auerbach will ask Moshe Feinstein a question, and he could answer it himself. But he values the opinion of a distinguished colleague. One does find that. But furthermore, if you learn that tshuva, you will see that the questions, the way the question is formulated, reveals tremendous erudition, and in the response, he basically agrees with all of the suggestions in the question. So the Chida says from here you see the brilliance of the Ari. You don't, the fact he had to ask a question doesn't call into question. Maybe he wasn't so erudite in his own right. On the contrary, from the question you see his brilliance. But Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, who has published from the manuscript a new collection of writings of the Reb Chaim Vital, we'll get to that shortly, has an extensive introduction with my good friend Miguel brought to my attention, and he quotes his son who has a suggestion. He says that this is a question, I told you, of a business nature. He said it's very possible the Ari, you may be surprised to learn, was in business. He was a businessman. And the question very likely related to his own business affairs. And he felt, I don't want to decide for myself how to paskin in this matter. I might have a personal interest. So therefore, although I have my own ideas about it, but maybe I have a vested interest in the decision. So therefore, I'm going to address it to the Gadol Ha'ir, the Gadol Hadar, who is the Beis Yosef. And I think that's a very lovely suggestion as well.
Today, Rabbi Hillel was in my house, and we discussed exactly this.
Is that right?
And he said that where you know exactly what you said, but when you can tell that the letter is true and that the raya of the Ben Ish Chai is very dismissible, is that when he quoted the question and showed this erudition, he didn't bring even other sources to sustain his position. And when he answered following exactly what he
had. The same line of reasoning, yeah.
He didn't bring any chidush or any contradiction.
So basically, he validated, he just ratified.
A second opinion on something that he already knew, and he gave his support.
Yeah,
so
that's
from the Chida, the Shema Gdolim proves that cannot be a false.
Yeah, there's no reason to say it must be a forgery, a false attribution. There's no reason to say that at all. Okay.
And they are mechutanim also, he said. That the Ari and there is a proof he showed me in a book that the Ari and Rabbi Yosef Karo were mechutanim.
Is that right? That's interesting. That's interesting. See, the Beis Yosef married 3 times. So when you marry 3 times, you can have a lot of potential relatives. He had his first 2 wives. He lived to 88, the age of 88. I was going to say, this Rabbi Hillel doesn't point out, but I'm sure you would agree, I would say. The Ari, when he came to Tzfat, he was 36 years old. The Beis Yosef was 45 years older than him. So, however erudite you are,
50 years.
that's right. However brilliant you are, when you come to a new town and the Gadol Hador, who's 45 years your senior, who's been there for years and years, is there to say, well, this I know myself. I don't have to ask the rabbi. It's not right. It's not even, you could say, even not derech eretz. So I think there's no reason to question whether this can be authentic. But again, my point in all of this is just to emphasize how before he began, or maybe concurrent with his mastery, which we'll talk about shortly, of the Kabbalistic, esoteric aspect of the Torah tradition, he achieved great proficiency in the conventional nigla aspects of Torah. He gradually turned to just to mention the in number 3 it says Egypt in item 3. He married at age 15, which in our circles is very young, but probably was not at all out of the ordinary at that time. So he married in any case at age 15. About his wife we know very little, almost nothing. She must have been a very special woman though. Firstly, if he wanted her, she wanted him. Plus, she was a cousin as well, so she had the good yichus. But most remarkable, we'll get to in just one moment. So he was involved in commerce. His father-in-law, uncle, as I said, was a wealthy man. He was a tax farmer, and he had presumably other business interests as well. And he must have set up his son-in-law in business. And we have evidence from the Cairo Geniza of some of the business affairs of the Ari. He dealt in pepper and in grain. In fact, the only surviving autograph manuscript from the Ari is found in the Cairo Geniza, and it is a record of his settling his business affairs 3 days before his death. Now, whether he was already ailing and he was worried that he might not live long and he needs to settle his affairs, or whether it was a kind of prophecy that he felt, recognized the need, but in any case it was dated 3 days before his passing. It could be that when he went to Tzfat that he was acting as an agent for his uncle as well in terms of business, but probably he wanted to make Aliyah to return to Eretz Yisrael, and I'm not saying that he went to Tzfat for reasons of business, but probably that was his parnasa, that he had some business affairs to work with his father-in-law pursuing while he was in Tzfat. But while he was already in Egypt, which, as we said, was most of his life, he was only 2.5 years in Tzfat, he gradually turned to asceticism, esotericism, mysticism, that is to say, withdrawing from society, from interaction with people, and even in terms of like yeshiva studies, he withdrew from that as well. It seems that the Zohar came to his hands, a copy of the Zohar, which had just been published for the first time, came to his hands, and when he looked at it or read it, he was immediately, I don't want to say taken with it, he probably knew of the Zohar, I'm sure he knew of the Zohar previously, but he presumably never had a chance to actually study it and to read it until it was published and became available to him. And he began to study the Zohar not only with great care and great intensity, but in complete seclusion and holiness. Now, there are different traditions about how many years. They say 7 years that he secluded himself in his own neighborhood, but he didn't go out, he didn't talk to people very much at all. Some say 1 year with Rabbi Tzala Ashkenazi, his rabbi, and then 6 years completely on his own. And then after that, it seems at a further stage, he actually left his home and his neighborhood, and he learned in complete seclusion on an island in the Nile Delta. I saw the name of the island is mentioned, but my Arabic is not worth anything, so I didn't commit it to memory. The name of the island is preserved. His uncle owned that island, so you could have those kinds of connections. And he stayed there for 6 days a week. He came home only on Shabbos. He would speak to his wife only in Lashon HaKodesh, and even then only as absolutely necessary.
Who wrote the Zohar?
Who wrote the Zohar? So the Zohar is attributed to the great Tana Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who lived in the 2nd century, and it was revealed only in the 12th century by Rabbi, or 13th century by Moshe de Leon, but it's attributed to early authorship. Of course, the Zohar is the classic, the main classic text of the Kabbalistic tradition. I think we have a copy of it over here, which is on the side, okay. So Philip donated it, he keeps it close to him on the other side, yeah. So there you have the Zohar. The Zohar, just to say, is written in Aramaic. It's very difficult to understand, even if you translate it into English. Very abstruse language, different types of metaphors and images. It is a very profound but very abstruse midrashic series of comments and explanations of the text of the Torah itself. So the Ari spent a further 7 years, as you've got then letter B, lowercase b in the parentheses, from age 22 on the reverse, by the way, turn the page over if you want. 7 years of Hisbodedus, seclusion on the Nile River island, owned by his uncle, intense study and meditation, rapturous prayer, mystical contemplation. And as we said, he returned home only on Shabbat, and there's some evidence that he experienced Gilui Eliyahu as well, that he learned together with Eliyahu Hanavi at that time. Finally, in 1569, it seems that he made his way to Tzfat, possibly settling briefly in Yerushalayim. Why did Tzfat attract great people? And actually, prior to this time, Tzfat was almost unknown, not only in the worldwide, but even locally. It was just a small village. It had been a Crusader fortress, but it had long fallen into disrepair after the Crusaders left. And Tzfat was almost, as I say, a complete backwater. So can someone tell me what was the attraction of Tzfat?
Meron.
It's near Meron, that's right. Meron is the traditional burial place of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Because of the proximity to Meron, so many great people gathered in Tzfat. And I mentioned 2 weeks ago, we spoke about the Beis Yosef, who himself was among the Megurashei Sfarad, the Spanish exiles, especially, I say many of the great ones. I'm not saying there were thousands of them, but many of the greatest made their way to Tzfat. They wanted to be near Meron. They wanted to commune, so to speak, with the teachings of the great Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And by the time the Ari made his way to Tzfat, it was already the center of the Jewish world intellectually, possibly having eclipsed even Yerushalayim, which the Yerushalmi were not happy about, by the way. In fact, when that earthquake took place, it was said that Yerushalayim is like expressing its feelings of being like usurped, that when the greatness of the land of Israel is concentrated in Tzfat, instead of Yerushalayim, it like knocks the whole country out of kilter. But in any case, Tzfat was the place where many great personalities assembled. We mentioned many times already the Rav Yosef Karo. Who else was there? Ramak Moshe Cordovero. His great brother-in-law, of whom he was a disciple. His great brother-in-law was called Shlomo Alkabetz. Why do we all remember Shlomo Alkabetz? Tell me. Chadodi, that's right. He is the author of the Chadodi, composer of the Chadodi, one of the most beautiful, most beloved, and most well-known piyutim, zemirot that we sing, of course, on Friday evening. And it was composed by Rosh Shlomo Alkabetz, and it was like it was used by the Ari and his circle as a way of welcoming Shabbat, as we still do today. But they would go out into the orchards, into the forest around the city in order to greet the sun, and as the sun began to set, in order to greet Shabbat. And we still have an echo of that. What do we do when we sing Lecha Dodi, which is an echo? That's right. When we turn around and we either face the back or we face the entrance, as if we are greeting the arrival of a distinguished guest. So that's what they would do, and this is the origin of Lecha Dodi. There were many other great people then as well. The shamus, the attendant of the group was Rabbi Eliezer Azkiri, the author of Sefer Charedim. He was the shamus. The chazen, we said Rosh Shlomo Alkavitz. The darshan was Rav Moshe Alshich. He was the darshan. So the Rav,
low level class.
yeah, that's right. Very fast company there. So the Ari, but we're getting slightly ahead of our story. So the Ari visited Meron and left in 1569, and this may well be the source of the tradition that Lag BaOmer is the yortzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. We actually don't find it in other sources, and some have questioned really the validity of that tradition altogether, because it may be based on a misprint. Rabbi Hillel has a little kuntras called Eid Hagal Hazeh, in which he sort of elaborates on the significance of Lag BaOmer, the history of Lag BaOmer, and there may be a misprint there, because it says Yom Shemeis Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but it should be, there's not Shemeis, Yom Samach Rabbi Shimon. It could be the tough. It's not a tough Shemeis, but it's a Chet Samach Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He rejoiced on that day. He didn't die on that day. But in any case, this seems to be the source of it, that he went to Meron on Lag BaOmer, and this is the when he first arrived in Tzfat. By 1570, we know he was in Tzfat, where he studied briefly with Rav Moshe Cordovero. Now, Rav Moshe Cordovero was the greatest Kabbalist of Tzfat, and possibly the greatest of the generation, until he was surpassed by the Ari. Moshe Cordovero wrote an extensive commentary on the Zohar called Or Yakar, and he wrote many other Svarim as well, Pardes Rimonim, Tomer Devora, which is very well known, possibly the most accessible of the classic Kabbalah Svarim is the Tomer Devora of Rav Moshe Cordovero. He was a great organizer. He had the capacity to not just study the Zohar, but understand it and present it, and the Zohar is very difficult to understand, partly because there's no organization. It was never properly edited, or at least it was maybe intended to be the way it is. I'm not saying that anyone needs to improve upon it, but the Zohar, as we have it, is a very difficult text, partly because there's no organization to it. So Moshe Cordovero, he had a very lucid approach, and there was a certain systematic feature of his Kabbalistic approach, and he was the main Kabbalistic authority. And Rav Chaim Vital was the Talmud of Moshe Cordovero, and it seems that Ari also was a Talmud of Moshe Cordovero for a short time, because Ari only arrived around 1570, and that same year, in June of that year, Rav Moshe Cordovero, Ramak, passed away. So he was probably studied with him only a matter of months, and yet the Ari himself called Rav Moshe Cordovero his master. But in actuality, the Kabbalah of the Ari greatly surpassed in impact and certainly in popularity of that of Rav Moshe Cordovero. There's a beautiful story of Rav Chaim Vital, who, as I said, was a Talmud of Rav Moshe Cordovero. And then it may have been even when Moshe Cordovero was still alive, or possibly after he passed away. He went with the Ari. Ari said, let's go out together for the day. So they did a day trip to Yam Kinneret, from Tzfat to Yam Kinneret. In Yam Kinneret, they went on a boat, and they went to the boat in the Sea of Galilee. And at a certain point, the Ari said to Rav Chaim Vital, he put his vessel in the water, and he said, drink this water. And he said, why, what's special about this water? He said, this place in the Yam Kinneret is where the Be'er Miriam has been permanently repositioned. The water in this spot is not just water that comes down from Har Hermon or Lebanon or wherever it might be. The water in this spot comes from the Be'er Miriam, the wellspring of Miriam. When you drink this water, you will be able to understand my teachings. Now, the story has a depth to it, because without going into the significance of Miriam and her name, Mayim and Mar, bitter waters, and Miriam had the capacity to sweeten the waters. Even without that, there's something else here as well. The Torah of the Ramak, as I said, is systematic. If a person has a strong background in Torah studies, and he's a profound thinker, and he's intelligent, and he invests the effort to understand the teaching of Moshe Cordovera, he can succeed. The teachings of the Ari are of a higher nature. They don't always, in fact, they generally do not emerge from rational, logical thinking. There is a transcendent nature of the teachings of the Ari which goes beyond logic. And in order to understand it, in order to appreciate it, a person needs to have that gift, or maybe that spiritual capacity to understand something which transcends human logic, which transcends, it derives from a higher place. And this is the idea of the Be'er Shel Miriam, the significance, okay, we don't have time to go into the exact significance of Miriam herself and how it fits in, but this is the story that is mentioned of the Ari and Rav Chaim Vital. After that, Rav Chaim Vital, I guess, had the special gift to be able to not only understand the Ari, but to become his chronicler. The great majority of the teachings of the Ari that we have that have come down to us are through Rav Chaim Vital, and certainly they're regarded as the most reliable. The Ari wrote very, very little. He wrote Askinu Sudasa, which many sing on Shabbos. He wrote another Zemer, which is not on the face of it so Kabbalistic or mysterious, and that is Yom Zeli Yisrael. Yom Zeli Yisrael or V'Simcha, it's, the acronym is Yitzchak Luria, and he wrote that Zemer as well. So it's ironic, from the pen of Rav Yitzchak Luria of the Ari, we have some business documents, and we have a few Zemiros that we sing in the Shabbos Tish. His actual Torah, he did not commit to writing. And of course people asked him why. I don't know how authentic this tradition is, but it could well be authentic. He said that I can't write down what I have to say. When I begin to speak, I'm like a gushing a torrent. And I think that his lectures probably also, they went from one topic to another topic to another topic. He had an inner circle of disciples who were extremely gifted. I mentioned Sefer Charedim, Eliyahu Davidas also was among them. I think I have here Mabit Rav Moshe Ditrani. You've got to add an R, Trani, Moshe Ditrani. Mabit was one of them. Rav Moshe Alshef, for some reason, was excluded from the inner circle of the Ari. I don't know why. I don't know if anyone knows why, but he was a sort of a contemporary, maybe an admirer, but he wasn't part of his inner circle. Arishno Alkabetz we mentioned already. So these like Gurei Ha'ari, these great devoted disciples of the Ari, they did their best to contain as much as they could. But it's like if you have a cask of fine whiskey, maybe aged 25 years or whatever it might be, and you want to transfer it into another vessel, but the vessel you have, Nebuch, is only a jigger, So what happens to all of that fine whiskey? Well, the jigger can only contain as much as it can contain. So that's what they say, that's what the Medrash says about, without the Scotch analogy, between Moshe Rabbeinu and Yehoshua, that the face of Moshe shone like the sun, Yehoshua was like the moon. But something like that is probably also applicable here with the Ari and Rav Chaim Vital and his disciples generally. Rav Chaim Vital, though, probably was among the closest and the most gifted, and it was he who recorded a book which is known generally as Eitz Chaim. Now, this many of it, so there are eight sort of separate books, and each book was given to a different Talmud, and they as a manuscript, and they had to swear not to reveal it, or not to publish it, and not to take it out of Eretz Yisrael. For a long time, they circulated only among his circle of followers, but eventually it was sort of smuggled out, and they were published. Many writings of the collections of the Reb Chaim Vital have appeared. I don't have any of them. Some of these belong to Yosef. These two belong to my son. Got them as a bar mitzvah present. Someone had obviously great expectations for Simcha, which no doubt are well justified. So it's called Eitz Hadas Tov HaShalem, Rabbi Chaim Vital, and this Chidushim al HaTorah is one volume, and sort of collected writings is the other volume. So these are two volumes. This one I mentioned already has just been published recently by Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, that Miguel was kind of.
This is also an 8 volume.
This is all, yeah. Oh, there's also 8 volumes, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, I
This
see.
one is only it's only the things that the Ari wrote himself, not the Eschem, in his youth on the mainly on the Nista, on the Nigla.
Oh, I see.
And then came the whole story that he described in the book
Right.
about the story of Eschem, the way it was hidden,
Right.
and the different versions, different Talmidim, and the grandson, the son of the Archo.
Right, yeah,
all
the whole, yeah. Okay, so, just also, here, for those who are in the Pirkei Avos series in the summer, so we mentioned very often Medrash Shmuel. Medrash Shmuel is written by Rabbi Shmuel di Uzida, was also a Talmud of the Ari, and he actually gave a hesped on the Ari, and he praised his greatness in Nigla as well as in Nistar as well. Another name also that you may or may not have heard of, Rabbi Yisrael Najara. Rabbi Yisrael Najara is well known to us by his writings, not so much his name. What did he write?
All the Zemirot.
Karibon is written by, and he wrote many of them actually, but the most famous one is this one that we sing on Shabbat, Yaribon Olam. This was also one of his many Talmidim. So he had, as I said, many Talmidim, and his writing, his teachings have found their way into the sort of separate Reshis Chachma and Sefer Charedim and other books as well. But again, Reb Chaim Vital is regarded as the most authoritative. Although I just have a few other books here, I'll just mention them. So this is just published recently, Otzros Chaim, that Yosef showed me, which is from Reb Chaim Vital as well. Shar HaKavanot is part of the Eitz Chaim series, and it's very extensive here as well. We have also, for those who prefer the English, Shar HaGilgulim, and if you can understand it, and that is great because it's a bit beyond me, but it has an English translation as well. Gilgulim are the souls that have been reincarnated, transmigration of the souls. And the Ari developed this idea, which is found in the Zohar often. The Ari developed it much further. And Chidav, which I learned last year and on the Parsha, many of you are aware of that, are aware that I was learning it anyway, very often reveals such profound and fascinating insights into the nature of personalities from the Torah, from the Tanakh, and sometimes of the Mishnah and the Gemara, in terms of Gilgulim. Who was the Gilgul of whom? We mentioned, I think, that Avraham and Sarah were a Gilgul of Adam and Chava, and that is mentioned in the Chidach. It's again part of the teachings of the Ari. And finally, this beautifully produced book, Apples from the Orchard, which is the Ari on the Parsha of the week. I'll just pass this one around. If you don't mind, can I pass it around? Go on stay there. But just very interesting. Just you can take these as well, actually. If anyone would like to see it, you can just take it.
I think 8 Torah is also on the Parsha.
Yes, yeah. the first volume is on the Parshas. Okay, we're talking about activities I want to be able to finish in timely fashion. So we mentioned the Serv Chaim Vital and the waters of the Kinneret. It's well known that the Ari, possibly through Gilui Eliyahu, was able to identify the places of the burial sites of great Torah personalities, including sages of the Mishnah and Gemara as well. One of the main, tourist projects in the north of Israel is to visit the Kivrei Tzadikim, and we have many Tanaim and Amoraim whose graves are identified, and they were all identified by the Ari. They say he used to go for walks with his Talmidim, when you drive in the Galil, you can see signs to different Kfarim of very important Talmudic personalities. I don't think he identified Amuka. Some have suggested Amuka was created by Eged in the 1950s. I don't know if you've heard about that as well. But anyway, okay, so...
It means the Rabbi Shimon and Chai was there before the Arizal, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think so, yes. Yeah, that tradition is an ancient tradition already, before the Ari. But the Ari identified many others as well. Okay, in letter C, he wrote almost nothing. We mentioned that, a few poems. His teachings are recorded, etc. Also, Shivchei Ha'ari, Shulchan Aruch Ha'ari. And it's interesting that even now more writings are still produced and are still published from the teachings of the Ari. He died in an epidemic at the age of 38 on the 5th of Av, which is 25 July 1572. Just to talk briefly about his teachings, and if we have time, on the last page, the reverse, we have a few excerpts from some of his writings as well, or writings of Chaim Vital actually. So his teachings are profound, very novel, known as Lurianic Kabbalah. The idea of tzimtzum, the notion that Hashem contracted within himself to create space for the universe. The idea of Shvirat HaKelim is a fundamental teaching of the Ari, the notion that Hashem's emanations were so intense that the physical world could not contain it, and they shattered, and it's our objective is to restore the world to its state of harmony. The idea of tikkun olam, really means to rectify the world from its spiritual imbalance. Or to put it a bit differently, the idea of redeeming the sparks of holiness, that everything in the world, including physical activities, including physical objects, have sanctity, have sparks of holiness embedded within it. And when a person makes a bracha on a cup of coffee, and when he drinks the coffee with the right intention, the right purpose, so he can listen to a shiur or with the alertness or whatever it might be, if a person eats dinner in order to have strength to serve Hashem properly, when he recites a bracha or when he studies Torah, but even mundane activities, if they're done in the right way for the right purpose, it infuses holiness within those objects and redeems or liberates the sparks of holiness that are within it. I want to talk about the influence of the Ari, and I think, I may not be a profound insight, I don't think it's profound at all, but to me it was a surprising insight. We're talking here in our series about sages of the ages, and we've chosen 5 great Torah personalities, as I said, from the 16th century. And last term, during the summer, we did Rashi and Rambam, and we did Ramban, and we did the tour. With the possible exception of Rashi, if those other Torah personalities had never lived and had never written the works that they did, our observance of Judaism would probably be pretty much the same as it is. Now, we may not be here because Jewish life probably would have been different because these are such influential personalities. But my point is that even the Rambam, for all of his brilliance and all of his originality, the Mishnah Torah is based on the Gemara. And it's true that there are many passages in the Mishnah Torah which we wonder, where does it come from? Why does he paskin the way he does? Maybe there's another opinion which seems to be a more compelling opinion, and much energy and ingenuity and brilliance has been devoted to understanding the Rambam. But everyone will agree that the Rambam derives, the Mishnah Torah derives essentially from the Gemara. And that's true for the Rif, and it's true for the Shulchan Aruch, it's true for the Torah as well. I say with the possible exception of Rashi, because Rashi has opened the key to understanding the Gemara, and even Chumash as well. But in terms of our understanding and our practice of our faith, it derives from the Torah and from the Talmud. And all of these great personalities have simply clarified that or systematized it. But the Ari takes us far beyond that. The Ari, his contribution is not limited to the Gemara. On the contrary, the Kabbalistic tradition introduces to our observance of our faith so many aspects that without the Ari we wouldn't have them at all. So many things, so many aspects of our tefillah. I made a whole list of them here.
Big reformer.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. He is so many innovations, and when we study the Shulchan Aruch and the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, especially the Magen Avraham. I don't know whether you've heard of Magen Avraham or Avraham Gumbeiner. The Magen Avraham is one of the most influential Ashkenazic commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, and he was the one to introduce the teachings of the Ari. He quotes the Ari very frequently, and because Magen Avraham is very influential, so the Ari has been like ushered into the inner sanctum of the halachic system. But he comes from left field, as we say in America, because he doesn't rely on a Talmudic passage which he explains in a certain way or a different way. He comes from a higher realm, and it's remarkable that his saintliness and his holiness is of such a stature that he has been able to shake up the practice of our faith. Modani lefanecha is that phrase. It's not a pasuk in the Torah. It's not mentioned in the Talmud. It's not mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch. It's not mentioned in the Rambam or the Torah. It was written in a sefer called Seder Hayom, which was a Talmud of the Ari. So much of what we do, so many of our minhagim are in that category. I'm going to list them somewhere. Let's see here it is at the moment. So the teachings of the Ari are so influential and so widespread. So many things that we do, so many aspects of our faith derived from the Ari. But of course, it's not without controversy, because the popularity of Kabbalah alarmed many people who felt that it was like a tool that was falling into inexperienced hands, and that it threatened the established order. And the Ari and the teachings of the Ari gave rise to the Hasidic movement a couple of centuries later. The Baal Shem Tov drew very widely on the teachings of the Ari. In fact, what's known as Nusach Sfard was chosen by the Baal Shem Tov and his followers as a way of distinguishing themselves from the rest of Polish Jewry and the rest of Ashkenazic Jewry generally, and they were fond of the Kabbalistic teachings of the Ari. That's why it's called Nusach Sfard. It's not it's not the real Nusach Sfard. There's something called Nusach Ari. Now Chabad, they claim to have Nusach Ari, which is closer to the real Nusach Ari. It's not the true Nusach Ari though. A few years ago, someone published a siddur which is the true, actual Nusach Ari. Closer to the Nusach Ari is a Nusach of the Chidah, which is very popular, and a lot of the Sephardi, by which I mean the Edot and Mizrach Sidurim that are popular today, are based on the Chidah, who has again culled and edited and incorporated many teachings of the Ari. But all of those versions, they all have their roots in the teachings of the Ari. And together with the Hasidic movement, or actually preceding it, of the Hasidic movement, also, I'm sorry to say, is Shabtai Tzvi, the false Messiah. He also was able to draw on the popularity of the Kabbalistic teachings, which held out the promise of Messianic times. We mentioned last week, I don't want to dwell on it again, we don't have time, but we mentioned last week, 2 weeks ago, we spoke about Rav Yosef Karo, that those holy people who came to Tzfat, they wanted to go to Tzfat to bring the redemption. They were traumatized by the Spanish expulsion, and they were convinced, or they certainly wanted to believe, that their trauma was a fulfillment of the great conflict, the great upheaval of Gog u'Magog that will usher in the Messianic era. In order to ascribe meaning and purpose to their suffering, they saw it in terms of the divine plan to bring Mashiach. And therefore it was just a matter of sort of like the finishing touches, just like, we're nearly there, we just had to push over the line. And they felt that the teachings of the Ari held out the promise in order to achieve that. But the Jews of Tzfat were not the only ones who wanted to bring Mashiach. We all want Mashiach. And therefore the Shabtai Tzvi was able to harness that desire together with the popularity of Kabbalah in order to style himself as the Messiah, and unfortunately that all ended in tears.
Rabbi,
yeah.
We all want Mashiach, but it seems like the Ari lived the life and taught others to speed up and to make the world a place where Mashiach was possible.
I agree. Yeah.
And so, you know, the history is very interesting, but what do we need to do to be more like the Ari?
Well, okay, I mentioned certainly his Torah study was of a high standard. His mitzvah observance was of an exacting standard. He bequeathed to his followers and to all of us the system that looks beyond, as we say, the veneer, or beyond that which is evident on the surface, to look within. He certainly taught, all of those things, personal, I don't want to use the word perfection, but the effort for self-improvement was certainly part of his agenda. I mean, I agree with your comments, Philip, when you say that, he taught us to make the world worthy of Mashiach. History has not been especially kind, though, to that expectation, because we're now hundreds of years later, and we're still waiting. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to despair, and I'm not saying we need to find another way to bring Mashiach because his way hasn't worked. But I would just observe that the ardent expectation that he expressed remains still unrealized. And we're not giving up.
Maybe we're looking the wrong way.
It could be. I mean, look, I'm not suggesting that, although I have to tell you that reform also draws on the teachings of the Ari. I mean, they did think we're going about it the wrong way. All of this prayer and piety and devotion has been a bust. We need something different. Let's modernize Judaism, etc., which also hasn't brought great blessing to anyone either. But I'm just saying that the possibilities remain vast. I feel we should stick with what works. And definitely, as I've said, one could argue that the contribution of the Ari is more profound than any of the other great rabbis we've spoken about, because of his originality and because he has given rise to the Hasidic movement, and even in the non-Hasidic world. I must say, I don't know whether anyone here, I think Miguel certainly has, but others, maybe you've met Rabbi Moshe Shapiro, the late Rabbi Moshe Shapiro. To me, what they say about the Ari, that when he would begin to speak, his ideas would flow like a torrent, and he couldn't write them down. Rabbi Moshe Shapiro, I think, was an echo of that. I mean, he would speak for an hour normally at a time, without notes, with great fluency, great precision. His diction, Rabbi Moshe Shapiro, was beautiful. I always loved to listen to him, even in Yiddish, but especially in Hebrew. He was like, as I say, a torrent that would flow. But to write it down and to capture it was very difficult, and he wrote very little from Moshe Shapiro. And I think he was a little bit like an echo of the Ari. His knowledge, his profundity was so vast, it was very difficult to capture it. So we've spoken about that maybe just for 2 minutes, and look at the back page as well, and you can really at your own leisure. These are, I think, good translations of a few short excerpts of ways of prayer. For example, in number 5 in the left-hand column, the last one, my teacher used to recite the prayers from the prayer book and not orally, meaning not by heart. All parts quoted from the Bible used to recite with the proper cantillation. And all parts quoted from the Mishnah used to recite with the melody. It means the nigun of learning Mishnah. And that's mentioned in Mishnah Berurah as well, actually. But he says, the Mishnah Berurah says that for like Shema, Kriyat Shema, although it's maybe precise to say it, to chant it according to the cantillation notes, for those who know that, but the Mishnah Berurah says that some people find it difficult to concentrate then. It's easier to concentrate on the meaning if they just say it rather than to chant it. But there are places where they chant it, some Sephardim, they chant it, everything, word for word. And this comes from the Ari, and also Ezehu, Mekomen Shel Zvachim, and Rabbi Chanani, Rabbi Shmuel Omer, and Bamei Madlikin, for those who say it. Actually, Sephardim don't say it, we also don't say it. But those who say it. No, we don't say Bamei Madlikin. Kesher though. No. Well, you say Bamei Madlikin? You don't say Kegavna? Oh, the Nusach Sfar say Kegavna.
No.
How do you do?
I
stand corrected. I stand for correctly. Okay.
Where does this come from then?
The ways of prayer, the translation, or
Originally.
it comes from. I think it comes from the Shulchan Aruch of the Ari. It's not the same as the Shulchan. It's just a name given to a collection of his writings, which again, does come from here. For Kavanah, okay. Oh, I see. Okay. Yosef says this comes from Shah HaKavanah. We could possibly look it up here. I don't want to say where this translation comes from. It comes from.
Original, not from the actual original.
Yeah.
The text.
The text comes. Yosef says it comes from Shar HaKavanot. Shar HaKavanot of Rav Chaim Vital from the teachings of the Rebbe. Okay, I think we've done quite a lot tonight. Thank you for your patience and for your attentiveness. And we have scratched the surface of the legacy of the Ari and a bit of what we know of his biography. Idach Perusha Zil Gemara. So now you've got some resources, and we should all be zocha, we should all merit to understand the teachings of the Ari, to apply them, and ultimately to realize his ultimate objective of bringing the redemption in Rabbi Amennu. Thank you very much.